Hey everyone, it's Lance from Christianity Minute. Spiritual gifts are powers that we see throughout the Bible, with judges, prophets, apostles, elders, and many others. They are very real. So real that it's caused no small confusion amongst modern Christians. Well, this video is part 4 in a series where we look at those spiritual gifts, their purpose, and if we can still obtain or develop those gifts today. This topic is so big, I've broken it up into multiple parts. Once each part airs, I'll post links to the end card and in the video description to each one, and a playlist will be set up. Before we get started, I really want to say thank you for checking out this video. I hope that you leave with a deeper understanding of God's Word and inspire you to do more study. Don't forget, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing. Also, I'm really still trying to get this channel off the ground, so consider helping me out by donating at patreon.com/Christianity Minute. Now, it's important to study these things because they're in the Bible. But even the Christians who had the direct teachings of Paul abused and misused these items. So Paul begins in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 1, saying, "Now, concerning spiritual gifts, brothers, I do not want you to be uninformed." So, to keep you informed today, we'll be continuing talking about and describing spiritual gifts. We read verses 4 through 11 in part 1, so I won't reread all of them here, especially since we'll be going over the rest of the chapter and the following chapters in this series. But the last part of verse 10 is going to be our focus this week. I have it highlighted on the screen for you. If you maybe feel a little odd that I'm chopping up the verse like this, just remember, Paul wrote this as a letter. And the chapters and the verses, well, they were all added by man at a later date. It's not a construct of God, so they're not always the most ideal stopping spots. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 10c. To another, various kinds of tongues. To another, the interpretation of tongues. Last week, we focused on the middle part of verse 10, talking about the gifts of prophecy. But this week, we go into some of the most controversial of the groupings. I'll mainly define them today, as we're going to go into the following chapters at a later time. These two are the most obvious to be paired together, as one is the speaking of a tongue, and the other is the interpretation of a tongue into language that others could understand. Well, that seems fairly straightforward, but can't we just all learn how to do that thing through hard work and study? While we can learn those languages, the miracles work very differently. Starting with the gift of tongues, we can see a first example of this back in Acts chapter 2, starting in verse 5. It reads, "Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at this sound the multitude came together, and they were bewildered, because each one of them was hearing them speak in his own language. And they were amazed and astonished, saying, 'Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? And how is it that we hear each one in our own native language? Parthians and Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt, and parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretians and Arabians. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God.' And all were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, 'What does this mean?'" Here we see on the day of Pentecost where the apostles are preaching the first gospel sermon. But the people they're talking to have all come from all over the ancient world. All these people had different cultures, different languages, but a miracle happened, where all of a sudden they could hear in their own language. Please note that the miracle was the tongues being spoken, not upon the hearer. They all look at each other and they're confused because these apostles seem to be Galileans. Let's face it, Galileans are not well renowned for their mental prowess. Instead, they're known for being simple folk, poor folk, lots of fishermen, and menial labor folk. It was highly unlikely that these men from Galilee could have learned all these languages, yet everyone can hear that these men are speaking in the native tongues of the different peoples that are there. These tongues were not known to the men speaking them. And that's the miracle. That's what cannot be obtained through study and diligent thought. Because those things can give you knowledge of the language. The spiritual gift of tongues should not be misunderstood and confused with knowledge. How do we know they didn't know the languages prior to what the Bible has on record? Well, we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 2. It says, "For one who speaks in a tongue speaks not to men, but to God. For no one understands him, but he utters mysteries in the Spirit." Well, I can tell you, it's not a mystery if it's understood. That includes the speaker. I can hear myself right now. In fact, my wife thinks that I really enjoy this sensation. But I can understand what I'm saying. I really hope that you're able to do the same. If you're not able to understand, then the speaker of tongues is to be silent or have an interpreter. The speaking of tongues is confirmation of God's word, not to utter mysteries. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 27 and 28 say that, "If any speak in a tongue, let there be only one or two, at most three, and each in turn. Let someone interpret. But if there is no one to interpret, let each of them keep silent in church and speak to himself and to God." Well, the interpreter was required to speak in a tongue so that everyone could understand. Since the speaking was a miraculous gift and therefore dynamic in his languages, the interpretation had to be the same. The interpreter would not have had knowledge of the language, but would be able to understand and relay the messages in his native tongue. These balances existed so that everyone could understand the requirements and the purposes of the miracles. Next time in this series, we'll dive into whether we can obtain these spiritual gifts today or not as we speak about the following chapters. Remember, these spiritual gifts are very real, and it's our job as Christians to examine the Scriptures and understand what they are and why they exist. Keep looking forward to next time, because that's been your Christianity Minute for this week. I work hard to make sure that all things said are scripturally accurate, offer exegesis, and clearly state any opinions I may offer. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. Also, check out some of my other videos on the left. Remember, if you like this video, like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, if you want to support this video directly, you can do so at Patreon. I post a new video every Sunday and a short devotional video every Tuesday and Thursday. I hope you learned something today, and I look forward to seeing you again next time right here on Christianity Minute.